Welcome back. New York City schools have once again shuttered. Yet, 8 months into the COVID-19 crisis, thousands of homeless children still do not have the reliable internet access they need to participate in remote learning. Legal Aid Society and Millbank LLP recently filed a lawsuit against the city for failing to provide students in homeless shelters with access to Wi-Fi. Joining us now to share more is Susan J. Horwitz of the Legal Aid Society. Susan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Of course. Just to start, can we just learn a little bit more about the Legal Aid Society and your mission?
So the Legal Aid Society is the largest legal services organization and also the oldest in the country. We provide legal services in a variety of areas to low-income folks throughout New York City, in all 5 boroughs. We are the largest criminal defense organization. We also represent lots and lots of kids who are involved in family court proceedings. And then in the civil practice where I work, we handle housing, benefits, government benefits, disability. We have a low-income tax clinic. We have a worker rights project. Basically, any area of need for legal services, we can probably cover it through the Legal Aid Society.
Thank you, Susan. And can you share more about your work to prevent homelessness and save homes and how this work has continued, especially throughout the pandemic?
So we have an enormous practice in our housing units, primarily for eviction defense. During this current pandemic, there have been some, the moratoriums on evictions have been passed through the state and also through the CDC, but those moratoriums are now scheduled to end unless the governor takes some more action. Our housing lawyers have been working throughout the crisis to make sure that the eviction moratorium is complied with, and also are prepared to start running into court as soon as that ends, to ensure that we can keep people in their homes. We also do some other types of housing work involving things like addressing conditions overall in buildings through our group advocacy project. And then we also have our homeless rights project, which is one of the units in legal aid that worked on this case with me from the education law unit, that addresses conditions in shelters.
Let's get into the case now, Susan. Recently, as we said in the beginning, Legal Aid Society and Millbank LLP sued New York City for failing to provide students in homeless shelters access to Wi-Fi. Can you tell us more about this issue and your findings with this case?
Yeah, so pretty much as soon as schools shut down, we started hearing about problems with students being able to access online learning. The DOE did a very commendable job of distributing hundreds of thousands of internet-enabled iPads to students living in shelters and other students. The problem is those iPads all connect to the internet through a cell service. And so if you think about the challenges involved in basically going to school via your smartphone, with one room in the house works, another room in the house doesn't work, and then think about kids in shelters who are usually living with their families in 1 or 2 rooms, often multiple kids in the families trying to get online at the same time and trying to be able to just focus on instruction under some very inhospitable circumstances. Right. And so what we discovered was that there were lots and lots of kids in shelters who were in cell dead zones. Legal Aid Society and Coalition for the Homeless together really tried very, very hard to advocate for some kind of a solution to this, starting in about April of last spring. But the city, for the most part, sort of said, yeah, we'll look at it. Mm-hmm. The iPads work. Maybe we'll talk about like coming out and doing some site visits and checking service. But the city didn't do anything about it until the end of August, when they started actually sending the cell company out to take a look at why there were issues with service in certain places. Mm-hmm. Throughout this entire time, we were really pushing the Department of Homeless Services to start putting Wi-Fi into shelters, because, it's right now the acute issue is the access to remote learning. But if you think about equity in education, every kid who has access to the internet is using the internet to do homework, to do research. And so we've got this whole group of kids in shelters who don't have that opportunity because they don't have internet in the shelters. So, finally, we filed our case a couple of weeks ago after sending a couple of letters to the city saying, listen, you really need to make sure that all these kids can access online learning, and not getting a satisfactory response. And now we're in court. We are litigating the issues.
And when does the city what's the deadline for the city to provide this Wi-Fi in these shelters, Susan? Can you share more about that?
Sure. The demand that we made in our papers was to fully equip all shelters by January 4th. And we selected that day because it's the first day back to school after the winter break. Now, the city did respond to our initial letters expressing concern by noting that they were working on it. They were getting site surveys. They were contracting with cell providers, but that they wouldn't be finished wiring all the shelters until the summer of 2021, which is a full school year of no service. And some schools have opened up K through 5 now for families who had already, as of this week, families who had already opted in. But our families are living in the communities that are the most vulnerable and the hardest hit to COVID, because they are Black and Hispanic kids. And that's the community that's been devastated. And so the majority of the parents we've spoken to don't want to send their kids out any more than they absolutely have to, meaning they're not going to send them to school.
Right. And Susan, can you share what the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act is and how this act protects homeless students?
Yes, the McKinney-Vento Act is a federal law that was created to protect the rights of homeless students with respect to education. And, McKinney-Vento was created to remedy issues like kids moving around to different areas, different shelters when they become homeless, and being told, well, you just have to switch to a different school. You're going to have to go to the school that's the closest to the shelter. And when we talk about trying to keep some semblance of stability for kids, staying in the same school can be essential to really managing that terrible traumatic experience of becoming homeless. So McKinney-Vento covers any barrier to accessing education. And so initially it was about things like transportation to the school where the child used to live. But right now we're talking about access to education being fully dependent on being able to get on the internet. And so as we noted in our papers, the internet is the virtual school bus that is required for these students to be able to attend school.
Right.
And McKinney-Vento was also, each of the states adopted their own particular regulations. And it's just really important to remember that this was a protection to ensure school stability and ensure equitable access to education for kids who are going through the terrible experience of homelessness.
And Susan, was the act redacted or changed in order to suit our situation now with students going to school remotely? As you said, it's more about the physical space in the schools and like having access to these spaces, but was the act also changed in order to help with this case now?
No, I mean the act is what it is, but it clearly states that school districts have to remove any barrier to accessing education, not just getting there or being enrolled. It's any barrier to an education. And it clearly anticipates, look, no one could have anticipated a pandemic in the situation that we're in now, but it clearly anticipates that there will be things beyond just literally getting to the school that could come up for kids experiencing homelessness.
Absolutely. And can families contact Legal Aid Society with some of their testimonies on, how it's been going for them in homeless shelters?
Yes. 888-663-6880 is our general intake hotline. 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. every day is when that line is staffed. And that line also, I should say, also serves as our intake line for a whole host of legal services issues. So if folks are having trouble with their food stamps, public assistance, SSI, Medicaid issues, employment issues, unemployment benefits, they can call that line for a general intake. So, but we are absolutely seeking to hear from more families who, may be a little bit under the radar because they haven't been given the tools, and they don't know who to call when there are issues with getting online in shelters. And in fact, since we filed the case, we've heard from a handful of families who are living in shelters that we did not know that there was a problem. And so anyone who is experiencing this issue, I really urge you to call our hotline and let us know what's happening.
Thank you so much, Susan, for joining us today.
Thank you. I really appreciate your inviting me on today.
The number to contact Legal Aid Society is 888-663-6880. There you can share your testimony on how you've been affected by the lack of Wi-Fi in shelters, and also get other information and resources from the Legal Aid Society. You can also follow them on social media at Legal Aid NYC and go on their website at legalaidnyc.org. We'll be right back.